Hi, so welcome everyone to this webinar, Being a Parent Carer Rep, representing your parent carer community. So by popular request, we've put this on, and I'll just introduce myself. My name is Fazilla Amide, and I'm here as a contact associate. And my colleague?
I'm Sharon Smith, and I'm also presenting as a contact associate today.
Thanks. So welcome everyone again. So we're going to just give you a couple of minutes of boring stuff, apologies, in terms of how the webinar will work, and then hopefully we'll progress into the main body of the content. So we already know that connectivity, we've been doing this for a little while now, haven't we? If we lose one another, apologies, just bear with us. If you lose connectivity, just try and log off and log back on again is probably the easiest, like switch it on, switch it off, switch it on again. Hopefully you can see this introduction slide. We have got a slide on, so if you can't see the slide and you're on a laptop or tablet or smartphone, then do, say, log off and log back in again. Worst case, if you can still hear us, and I guess that's the most important thing, but just note we are being recorded. Next slide. So just in terms of timings, we're hopefully here for an hour and a half, but because we've got so many attendees, it's been a bit crazy actually. We've got, I think, over 130, 140, certainly 170 have signed up. So we cannot manage chat or just verbal questions with hands up, unfortunately. So you are going to have to remain muted throughout. But we do have the questions icon. So if you see on the side, on the right-hand side, you have a questions section. So you can go on there and then actually type your questions. And again, given the numbers that we've got today, I'm going to apologise in advance. We can just pick out a few questions and we'll have to move on. So, but don't feel free to ask them. And what we can try and do is see if afterwards if we can do some kind of Q&A. So we'll have the Q&A session after each section. We'll try and go through those questions, but we'll see if we can answer some of those even after the webinar so that you'll all get a response. And just a reminder on all of these things, there'll be a short questionnaire that will launch just for the evaluation. So do please take a minute or two just to go through and let us know what you're interested in terms of ongoing events. So this morning we're going to cover the background to parent carer participation, and that's kind of the legislation, the law, how it came into being. Parent carer forums, what they are, what they do, what they don't do. Attending meetings, that seems to be a popular thing that lots of our parent reps ask us about. So we'll be focusing in presentation and how to come across and how to prepare. And then gathering evidence, the importance of having facts, information, how do we get back from all of our family members and how we present that back to whoever needs that information. So without further ado, so we've got a separator slide, so we'll move on to the next slide around the legislation. And actually, this is quite interesting because there's actually a number of pieces of legislation now that's baked parent carer forums into the law, but also when we talk about, working together and collaboration. So you'll see a number of pieces of legislation here. The Children and Families Act is the main one, 2014, and equally 2015 SEN Code of Practice, which is almost like the summary of the Children and Families Act. And I think there's a few things to just draw out, is that in the Children and Families Act, the Department of Education actually want all children and young people to achieve well in their early years, at school and in college, all the settings, to be able to find employment if it's appropriate for them, and to lead happy and fulfilled lives. And that's really the fundamental aims. And ideally having kind of choice and control over their support. And by that very nature, it means that we have to be involved. Young people have to be involved in that. And there are three key principles in terms of this legislation. It's having regard to the views, wishes and feelings of the child, young person and their parents, includes us. The importance of allowing us to participate in decisions relating to themselves or their child, really important, and the importance of providing information to enable active participation in the decision making. So actually helping everyone to get the right information at the right time so that we feel informed and able to make decisions. And that's not just us as parents, that's also for our young people. So it's helping our young people learn some of those skills to get involved in however they can, whether it's just looking at pictures and choosing pictures in terms of, what they might want to do or what they want to eat, versus, if they've got really good comprehension, understanding and making decisions about their adulthood. And assessments, etc., should be the heart of that legislation. And I think more importantly, we'll be using the word co-production in a few slides. It's around working together to feel a sense of ownership, joint decision making. And that's really important equally. And that's mentioned in law in the Children and Families Act. And then we talk about not just education, but also social care and health. So you've got the Care Act 2014. It actively promotes participation, providing interventions. Again, they use the word co-produced with individuals, with families, and you work on an individual basis, but equally on a strategic basis. You've got the Health and Social Care Act 2015. It mentions patients and carers to participate in planning, managing, and making decisions about their care and treatment through the services they commission. And even in the NHS constitution, it talks about having the right to be involved and making decisions about our own health and care, and equally on a more strategic level that you've got the right to be involved directly or through representatives, which again you could be looking at the forums, in the planning of healthcare services commissioned by NHS bodies. You should have a handout as part of joining, and so there's a bit more detail in here, and all of the acts and the pieces of legislation. So if anybody challenges you, feel free to kind of talk about the legislation and where it came from. So next slide, thank you. So we've just touched on that in terms of the levels of participation, because we obviously have to work at an individual level. And it's really important that on a one-to-one, whether you're working with the local authority in your school on an education, health and care plan, or whether you're talking to NHS services about your child on a one-to-one basis, it's about being more involved in those conversations and not being done to, so that you can get information, you know what the situation is, and you can start to make choices to say, well, that would work for us, but actually this wouldn't. And that would really help if we could think about this. And then, of course, you've got the strategic level, which is really key. And that's where I guess forums come into their own, where you're looking at that collective. So you're speaking to a number of families, getting a number of views, not just your own. And that's really important. And we'll be saying that throughout. You'll get bored of us saying this. From a forum perspective, it's not about your child, it's about everyone in your borough, in your local area. So you'd be working with commissioners, so people who purchase those services, people who make policies, and looking at then shaping and trying to influence those services by working together to say, actually, we've heard from a number of parents, 100 parents, and actually this is what they're saying about this service, and actually the suggestion is if we just were to do this, that might really work better and help improve. And equally, it's important that in order for us to represent everyone, we actually have to get more participation, so more parents involved, whether that's through coffee mornings or chats or virtual events like this or webinars. However we can do it is to get that wider viewpoint. Okay, next slide, thank you. So it's quite difficult to explain how systems work, and every local area is going to be slightly different, but we just thought the different parts of the puzzle. So you've got that child and young person in the center, and it's about their outcomes, and outcomes means something that you want to see that's going to be different, that they would have achieved by a certain time in a few years time, that they can't do currently. So it might be to, have a social circle of friends. It might be that physical thing that they can actually hold a pen or type, whatever it is. And so, in order to help that young person achieve, you've got obviously us as families and carers, and we equally have to listen to our young people. So, this whole kind of idea of not doing two, as parents, we need to keep in our mind, even though we think we always know best, it's not just about us, it's about what our young people want. And then you've got health, and that again, we've just used one bubble. But for health, you've got NHS bodies like GP practices, and you've got therapies like speech and language and occupational therapy and physio. And then you've got hospital trusts. You've got what we might be aware of called a clinical commissioning group, CCG, which are now becoming integrated care systems. You may have heard of that. There'll be whole other webinars for all of that. So health is a massive kind of number of organizations. And then within the local authority, hopefully you'll all know, you've got special educational needs teams that process and do a lot of the work around education, health and care plans. You've got an education team, educational psychology service. And then social care. Social care again is not is a number of different organisations that could be looked after children. So children who are being adopted or up for adoption. It could be getting home help in the house. It could be getting respite care or what we now call short breaks, supported by the local authority. That's social care. And then, of course, you've got all those educational settings like nurseries, preschool support, schools, whether that's primary, secondary, independent, and colleges. And in terms of independent colleges, just to mention that you can Google if you want Section 41 list. There are a number of independent schools and colleges who will have signed up to the legislation that we're just talking about, the Children and Families Act. So independent schools are covered, as well as state-funded educational places. And then you've obviously got the community voluntary sector. And so don't forget about those organisations. There might be other parent support groups. You've got Sendias. You've got organisations like Health Watch that work very much like Parent Carer Forum. So you could work quite closely with those organisations to help get a fairer representation or get your voices heard. So next slide, thank you. So we talk about this kind of whole system working together. And the idea is that you look at funding. So if you imagine we've got the Parent Carer Forum here, and you've got individuals that sit below that, you might have an education, health and care plan, and that might be part funded by the local authority. You might get some social care provision, or you might have some therapeutic help. So you might have physio help, so that might be paid for by health. And then obviously you've got the educational element wherever they are being educated. And all of those have funding, so they have pots of money. And the idea is that more and more these big organizations come together and start to what we call pool the budget. So they might have 50p each organization, and they'll all pool it to make it to be £1.50 or £2 to help support that young person or child. And that, again, that's the idea. And when you hear about strategic commissioning, you look at maybe health outcomes. So then on a local area level, depending on the makeup of your families, if you have a high poverty or lower poverty but a different kind of needs, you might have long-term conditions, then again, as a local area, they should start to look at commissioning services to support that local area. Next slide, thank you. And we love this slide. It's really about perception, isn't it? So, I was one of those parents who bought a mobile for my young child, and I was so excited because it played all this music and it looked lovely. But actually, when you see it from the baby's perspective, lying on their back, all you just see is a lot of bums. So it's it's about perception and seeing things from people who use the services from their perspective, or that child or young person from their perspective, and not necessarily just from ours or from a local authority official. But we're the best people because we're living our lives on a day-to-day basis. So that's the beauty, that's what we can offer. Next slide, thank you. So we're talking here about, we talked about participation, and there are lots of conversations around the levels of participation. And at the top, if you look at the co-production and co-design, in effect, that is a co-producing is produce together. So you're working together from the beginning, blank piece of paper. And the co-design element is therefore you are designing and shaping services. You're working on it again together. So it's equal. You're working on it. No, there's nobody's agenda other than you want, the best for our families. And then just slightly lower down, it's just a step down. It's doing for, so you're still engaging and involving, but it might be consultations where local authorities are seeking feedback. Engagement is where you are involving people and you're doing stuff, but you might not be doing it as much as, actually, guys, let's sit and redesign a whole service. It wouldn't be that level, because that would be co-design, co-production. And then there's informing. So it's literally just telling somebody what's going on so that they know and they have some information. And then it says here doing two, educating and coercion, where it says, you're trying to fix things. And the coercion pit is the lowest point. And I could say another word is like manipulation, where you're negatively influencing. You're actually trying to make somebody do something to suit your own agenda. And that's not working together. And actually, as forums, sometimes we think that's the right thing. We hear from our families and we think this is the answer. So then we try and make the local authority do what we want. That's not co-production either. You present the information and some ideas for solutions, but then you work together on that. And that brings you back to the top of the ladder. Just a point before we move on to this slide, next slide, is about educating and informing, because I've always had a positive view of education, that it's two-way learning. And therefore, I would have suggested informing comes below that. But equally, it depends on some education where some people are just kind of ramming information in you and you're learning stuff by rote. And equally, I'd say that's probably not as well. Okay, can we move on to the next slide, please? So final slide before questions. The benefits really speak for themselves. Obviously, the whole point of this and the reason why the legislation is here is that we understand that if we all work together with our own unique perspectives, along with people who make decisions, people who have funding, then absolutely we all come together. We can be more creative in making those solutions. And hopefully the services become more appropriate, more effective. You get better value for money. And ideally then it's a win-win for all of us. And equally, if we're all working together, then local authorities and services are not in conflict. We're not taking them to tribunal every 5 minutes. It's about they can spend that time effectively working on things that will actually make a difference for us. So on that note, we're going to open up for questions. So Sharon, do you want to read some out and we'll see if we can answer them?
I could, but there aren't any. So
yeah, apart from somebody saying they can't hear.
Yeah, I think all of the questions that I have seen so far are around quality of sound and not being able to hear things.
Yeah, apologies, guys. Yeah, I think unfortunately with the sound and the technical issues, it's really hard because everybody's got their own connectivity challenges. So worst case, maybe you'll be joining instructions. You can dial in by phone, and that might help. So
okay, there's a question.
There's about what makes
what makes a great parent representative? So do you want to answer that one? And I know some of what I will be presenting will cover some of that, but if you want to give your
I was going to say that hopefully we'll be covering that as the rest of the session, but a lot of it is around your own personal attitude to life, actually, and how you control things and where you are in your journey of, I would use, acceptance of your child, because we know how stressful and difficult it can be, and diagnosis can be very difficult and stressful, and equally not getting the right support is, I think, one of the most stressful things that you can experience, and see your child not develop in the way that you'd want to be. So if you're a very stressed, angry parent that is really struggling, I would say it's not going to help you. You're just going to get more frustrated and angry. I think if you're a family where you've kind of starting to find your feet, you're accepting and understanding how the system works, but equally you still can see all of those holes in the system where we can make improvements. So you're forward thinking, then I think that's the best thing, where you're not in your own situation, but you're there getting a wider perspective to know actually we can make this better, but I'm in a constructive head that I know I can work to help people make things better. I don't know, Sharon, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, absolutely agree with you on that. And I know it's something that we've talked about previously. Just quickly, there's another question for you. How do you see, so there's two things. The first one, how do you see paid staff fitting into parent carer representation? Because that
Okay, so
obviously what
this
we're
is,
going to talk about is volunteer parent carer
yes,
representatives. So how do you
yes,
see paid staff fitting in?
yeah. I mean, this is a very personal perspective. I've said this is my own opinion. I think there's an absolute place for volunteers, and we couldn't do the work without a volunteer kind of, I call volunteer workforce. Um, Equally, there is so much work that needs to be done, and it needs to be relied on. And we need to be able to say to somebody, if we want you and we're saying equal value, then for me, equal value is equal pay. So I think people should get some kind of remuneration, pay, be an employee, whether it's part-time, a few hours a week, or a few hours a month, or might indeed full-time. Actually, some people are full-time. So I think there is a space, but we just have to do it properly and make sure we do it within land revenue rules. But that's not to say that would be a few people, because actually you need a wider group of families who can volunteer an hour here, an hour there, a few hours a week, to make things, improve the system and get wider parent representation. I don't know what your views are, Sharon.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important as well to sort of be clear about what those different roles are, so that you potentially could have somebody taken on a paid role, but also they can go and be that parent representative on an equal status with your other parent representatives as well. But I think that there is definitely scope for paid roles within forums, particularly once participation becomes more established and there's a lot of activity and a lot of work. And also those people can take on some of those things that I can see actually are being mentioned in the chat around
Yes,
getting new
yes.
people involved. And so I'm just aware of time. We've got
Time.
sort of a couple of minutes, but I can see there's a question in the chat about struggling with having active members and what's the best way to find new members. I don't know if Helen, who's monitoring the chat, can find the link. There is a contact webinar, I think, about getting more people involved in your forum. So from memory, I think there is another contact webinar about that. It's not something we're covering in this session. Fazilla, just quickly, we've got here, so one, I'm going to sort of merge two questions together. What's the guarantee that the local authority will take parent care forums seriously and meet the needs? And also sort of building that in, what happens if you, actually conflicts of interest I'm going to cover later. So that's your question, Fazilla. What's the guarantee that the local
Being
authority will
taken
listen?
seriously.
Yeah,
I mean, there isn't that guarantee, but there is the law. So again, that legislation that we've gone through, there are duties. So for example, even on a local offer, so the kind of services that you must have on each local authority's website, the local offer must be, so that's a duty, co-produced with the parent carer forum. So immediately that means that they have to be working with you and listening to you. And I think the more we're able to, and I apologize to say professionalize, but the more we can do the stuff that we're going to be talking about in this session, then the more they will take us seriously. And I've not met any forum yet that work really effectively with their local authority who are not doing all the stuff that we're talking about in this webinar. I'm just conscious of time, so I think we're going to have to move on.
yeah,
So I'll
absolutely.
over to you, Sharon.
Thank you. And I can see that some of the questions about things such as conflict of interest, then I'm actually going to cover anyway. So hopefully we can come to that. So I'm going to be talking in this section of the webinar about parent carer forums. So what a parent carer forum is, what their role is. So the Code of Practice for the first time has actually introduced parent carer forums. It wasn't, parent carer forums weren't mentioned in previous codes of practice. And in the Code of Practice, it describes forums as representative local groups of parents and carers of children and young people with disabilities who work alongside local authorities, education, health and other service providers to ensure the services that they're planning, commissioning, delivering and monitoring meet the needs of children and families. But alongside that, we wanted to actually include here what it is that forums say they're about. Forums originated actually by groups of parents coming together and trying to work together and work with and encourage change in their local area. So we wanted to actually include here, what do parents say forums are? And this is a word map of the aims and objectives from about 50 parent carer forums across the country. So you can see there that there are a number of words obviously that are sort of coming out as. So voice, support, working together, views, help, voluntary, involved, feedback, experiences, etc. So what we have is one parent carer forum per local authority area. And these forums are for parent carers of children and young people 0 to 25 with additional needs and disabilities. And they're frequently led by a voluntary steering group of parent carers, or they can be set up as a community interest company or a charity or a CIO, but again should have parents at the helm. Forums receive funding from the Department for Education to support this work. And again, this is something that has been a fairly recent, I think it's in the last 10 years that has been the case. And forums have the freedom, so the committee or the management or the charity trustees, whatever your setup is, have the freedom to decide how you're going to spend that money to develop participation in your local area, obviously subject to the terms of the grant or any other funding that you might receive. So forums can also receive funding from other sources, such as the local authority or health, or if they're a charity, they can apply for various other grants and different ways of actually raising money as well. And their accountability, parent carer forums are accountable to parents in the local area. And the role of the forum is to be an independent organisation. So even if the forum has actually secured funding from the local authority or health, you are still very much an independent forum rather than working for the local authority. And often what you'll find is forums will put in place an agreement that actually sets out the terms of any funding arrangement, such as a memorandum of understanding or a service level agreement. So in terms of what is the purpose of a parent carer forum, why are we all here? Parent carer forums are the way that parent carers can work strategically with professionals to ensure that the parent voice is heard. So if you go back to the slide that Fazilla used at the beginning of the presentation, where we have individual participation and strategic participation, this is the way that parent carers can get involved with strategic parent participation. And forums are responsible for understanding and representing the wide range of views of parents in their local area. And the aim is to help ensure that services in the local area meet the needs of local families. So one of the primary roles is to proactively go and seek and then represent the views of parent carers, ensuring that that wide range of voices are heard. So it's not just about representing the voices of those that are actively involved in the forum, but there is a responsibility and a requirement for you to actually go out and find out what it is that parent carers in your local area feel about services, what's going well, what's not going well, what would make a difference to their lives. The role is also to be involved in improving service strategy, design and delivery to make sure that services meet the needs of as many families locally as possible. And obviously that is to improve outcomes for our children. That's why we're all here. That's what we're wanting to do, is to improve outcomes for local families and children. And it's not about just trying to improve outcomes for your own child. So part of the role is to question and to provide challenge to those decision makers. Although co-production is about working in partnership with the local authority or health or other professional bodies, it's not about being compliant. It's not about always having views that are aligned with the views that the local authority or health might have. So it is about challenging some of those things. And sometimes what you might find is that policy or proposed policy might not actually be legal. So the more knowledge you have about the legal framework, the better, because that will help you actually provide some of that challenge as well. And that's really important as well at the time of budget cuts or during COVID, when some services potentially are not being provided, that there is still that legal duty to provide currently. So the role as well of the forum is to network with other organisations locally to gain a wider reach. So that might be with local support groups or other voluntary sector organisations, and to identify further opportunities for participation. So Fazilla mentioned Healthwatch earlier. They're a really good organisation to link in with, because Healthwatch potentially might have a seat at a table that forums might not always be able to get around. So it just means it's another route in for you getting the parent voice represented. And finally, it's to provide some input into regional and national initiatives such as consultations as well. So we thought it was also important for us to discuss what parent carer forums are not. So parent carer forums are not a support group, and I think sometimes there can be some confusion, and parents don't always necessarily know what they're signing up for with a parent carer forum when they sign up to your newsletter list, for instance. Now, whilst I say that they're not a support group and you're not a support group, obviously parent carer forums are frequently supportive and do provide opportunities for families to meet, to share their views and their experiences, and to gain some sense of solidarity with other families and some mutual support. But it's not the main remit of a parent carer forum. Parent carer forums are not also SENDIAS, so they're not your local information, advice and support services. So the forum shouldn't be trying to give individual advice or support for families locally. But you can obviously signpost, so when families come to you and they are talking about some of the difficulties they're facing, it's really useful for you to know who you can signpost them to, such as obviously SENDIAS or Contact or organisations such as ITSE. You're not an advocacy organisation, so the forums are not there to go and advocate for individual cases, especially not those just forum committee or membership. And you're not a campaigning or lobbying organisation either. Undertaking campaign activity is generally not seen to be consistent with the ethos of participation and parent carer forums. So you're looking to do co-production, and that doesn't sit very comfortably with campaigning. However, at times, it may well be that some of your members feel that it is really important to be involved in a campaign. So there is certainly no restrictions on those members going and being involved in campaigning in their own capacity. Contact has provided, in conjunction with the National Network of Parent Carer Forums, some really useful guidance. And I've just put the link on here for you to have a look at, but if you go to Contact's website, you will find it. Since February 2016, there have been limitations placed on funds for government contracts around campaigning. And that basically means that because forums receive their funding from the Department for Education, they can't use that grant for any campaigning or lobbying activity. So there are these funding constraints that are in place, but that doesn't stop your local forum from either supporting or raising awareness of other campaigning initiatives that may be going on in your local area. So it is worth getting familiar with that campaigning guidance so that you can see what is allowed and what's not suggested that you do. So just very briefly, want to talk to you about how forums fit into some of the sort of bigger picture. We have a national network of parent carer forums, and they operate in a similar way to how your forum operates for your local area. So their role is to represent the voice of the 152 parent carer forums that exist in the country. So they'll be engaging at a national level, working with the Department for Education, the Department of Health, other government organisations, and they encourage the sharing of information from the national level down to regional level, and then down to the forums, and vice versa. So you have an opportunity through the national network of parent carer forums to have your voice and your experiences heard at a national level. So as I've said, their role is to ensure that your voice and your expertise and your knowledge is represented at that national level. They also have a role in helping to share expertise and best practice around parent participation and to encourage and strengthen participation nationally. And they work with a number of organisations to actually influence on behalf of parents. And I've put their website on here as well for you. And then we have Contact, who obviously Fazilla and I are working for today in delivering this webinar. Contact are the delivery partner for the Department for Education in supporting parent carer participation in England. And they work in close partnership with the National Network of Parent Carer Forums. As part of their role, they have a dedicated regional advisor who offers support and will come along to some regional meetings as well to engage directly with you. They provide training and support such as this webinar, and there are a whole wealth of webinars on the website, so do go and have a look at those. And they administer the grant that the DFE provides for parent carer participation. So they will look at the grant applications and undertake all of the grant monitoring as well, including the discretionary grants. Their website has got a huge wealth of online resources. So there are example policies, good practice examples, there's all sorts of webinars and documentation that you can go and have a look at, and copies of presentations. So if you haven't had a look at that website, please do go and have a look. There's also a newsletter that you can sign up for as well. And this is how the three organisations work together. So I'm just going to keep this image up for a minute, but it just shows that the Parent Carer Forums, Contact and the National Network all come together with a strong commitment to embedding co-production at a local, regional and national level. And move on, conscious of time. So parent representative role, what is the role of a parent rep? Well, it's to attend meetings with the local authority and health and other organisations to represent the views of parent carers that the forum has gone out and collated. So it's using evidence to support a particular position or to actually describe what impact something might have on parents. So it's taken along parent feedback from things such as surveys or research, which I'll come on to in the last part of this presentation. The parent rep is the person who engages directly in that discussion and those decision-making processes. So they're there and can actually inform those decision makers about parents' experiences and what impact any decisions might make on families. So their role is obviously a hands-on role to try and improve outcomes for local families, to reach an understanding about what an effective service might look like and how the perspective of parents can work together with the perspective of the professionals to actually lead to better outcomes for our families. And it's to provide feedback. So one of the really important parts of that role is for actually being able to go back to parents who have given their views, who have shared their experiences, and to say, you told us this, we went and represented your voice in this way, and this is what's happened as a result. So the parent rep role isn't about just going to the meeting, but it's about actually feeding back in as a feedback loop back to the Parent Carer Forum to say what's actually happened as a result. Now, you don't have to be a parent rep to be involved in your forum. There's lots of other ways, and I'm sure your local forum would be delighted to have you in whatever capacity and whatever work you're able to do. So that could be doing admin work, such as coordinating meetings or coffee mornings, sharing information on social media, and going out and help gather information from other parents, supporting with finance. Forums are generally desperate for people that are really good with finance and budgeting. So if you have those skills, they'd love to hear from you. And networking with other groups and organisations and supporting with events as well. So in terms of the role, you are there to represent your forum, which means you're there to represent the voices of parents and carers in your local area and not your own voice. So you shouldn't be seeking to promote your own child's needs or your own aims, and you shouldn't expect to receive any more favourable or any less favourable treatment because you're there representing the forum. So you have quite a daunting task, actually, of representing the views from a wide range of experiences and backgrounds, because we're not a homogenous group. Parents of disabled children and our children are all very different. So it's really important that you find ways to actually represent that complexity and the diversity of voices that are in your local area. Obviously, conduct, we would say that a parent rep obviously needs to treat people courteously and with dignity and respect. So your forum will probably have a code of conduct, and it might be worth checking with them what it is, but it's around obviously making sure that you're not abusive or using discriminatory language or being rude in any of your engagements. Confidentiality, again, really important. And it's important that as a parent rep, you probably will come across information that's confidential, and you need to understand what information you can and can't share. Neutrality, that's also important, to avoid making political statements or showing any political bias or judgment in your meetings. And then it's understanding, before you go to a meeting, what is the scope of that meeting, what's its aims, what's its objectives. And conflicts of interest, just really want to cover this. This is where an individual becomes unreliable because there's a clash between their personal or other interests. So it's difficult to know whether they're acting in their own interests or the interests of the forum. Now, conflicts of interest will happen all of the time, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with a forum member having a conflict of interest. The only problem arises is if the member fails to declare that conflict of interest and then becomes involved in decisions or meetings or projects where they potentially could be questioned about whether they're doing things for personal gain. So it's always the responsibility of a forum member to identify any potential conflicts of interest and to declare them. And your forum should have a conflict of interest policy and a conflict of interest register. And if ever you're in doubt about a conflict, then it's always best to actually declare it, and then your forum can decide whether or not they see it as a conflict. So, for instance, a couple of examples just before we go on to questions. It could be that a parent is going through tribunal or complaints process, and they're also a rep on the Education Healthcare Plan Working Group. And that potentially could be seen as a conflict. So it might be better to have other parents on that working group instead. Or if a parent is being paid to do admin for your forum, then obviously you wouldn't have them staying in the meetings where you're discussing their role or their hours or the scope of their job. And another one potentially where there's a conflict is if a parent is also a chair of a support group locally, then you might start to question, are they acting in the interests of the support group rather than the forum, for example. So I'm just going to move on to questions. We've only got a couple of minutes, but Fazilla, do we have any questions? I can see there's loads in the chat. We'll come to as many as we can.
There's loads. I'm just conscious of our time as well, so if we answer a few and then we'll have to move on. But there's some general ones around, giving advice and support. Is like, well, surely we give support, and don't we give advice? Isn't it okay if a parent's struggling and they don't like their SEND-IAS, then can we not give advice?
Yeah, I mean, it's just about what your primary role is. And if you have got limited time, then what you should be doing with that is actually keeping a log of those things, those issues, gathering evidence, and then signposting. But absolutely, I did say in that you will be supportive and you will want to support those parents. But there's a slide at the end of this presentation as well that talks about, you know, the role of the forum, and as a parent representative, you need to also put some boundaries in place, and you need to make sure you're not taking on everybody's concerns. So there is a role in you understanding where to signpost to and to be supportive and to be friendly. But your primary role isn't about giving support. And if you have the choice between spending an hour supporting somebody or spending an hour collating evidence that then allows you to go and represent parents' views to try and shape services so that their parents don't need that support in the future, then that's what you should be doing, ideally. But it's a difficult balance.
I think the two other things, I think if you're supporting parents, that's fine. But again, it's about participation. So if you're supporting them, there's something that you'll need equally from them, which sounds awful, but it's like, you know, you're gathering the feedback, you're getting your experiences so that you're clear, back to Sharon's point, that you've got evidence. So if you're running a support group, maybe call it a participation information group. And so people can be coming to you for support, but what you're doing is you're getting information and evidence, and you're pulling that together. The only other thing I'd flag in terms of giving advice is we have to be careful, because there's lots of legislation in place, and it's one thing to say you're informally supporting families or informally signposting, but unless you've got a legal background or you've been SENDIAS trained, then we could be giving advice that actually might be incorrect if we're not sure. So be really careful about giving advice and supporting people, because they may be coming to you thinking you're all official and you know what, you know, and actually a lot of our families don't know that level of detail. With just a couple more questions and then we shall have to move on. There was things around how a parent rep selected, and what's the minimum expectations of parent reps in terms of selection?
Yeah, so that's for your local forum to decide. So that's why you would have a steering group or a committee or trustees, or a sort of management of the forum. So that's down for each local area to decide how you would want to do that. So it may well be in your constitution that parent representatives need to have been involved in the forum for a particular amount of time, or that they need to have gone on parent participation training. That's always something that's recommended before people go and actually undertake the role as a parent rep. But it's down to your local area to determine that. It's not something that Contact or the national network would tell you what to do or how to do it. It might be worth,
thanks.
yeah, so I was just going to say, in your regional meetings, actually finding out what your local forums do and working out from them what you think best practice might be for your area if you haven't got that policy in place.
Yeah, and that's what I was just going to suggest. There's lots of general questions asking information that actually, if you go onto the Contact website, there's lots of information on the Contact website. You've got your Contact regional advisors. If you've got specific nitty-gritty questions, you've always got them to ask for support. We've mentioned the national rep. You've got forums have their regional reps that they can be asking. So there's lots of places to get information, and equally, this slide set you can apparently download if you there's an icon a page icon next to your question icon, and it will show both documents, but if you don't want to mess around with that, you can look at those later. I'm just going to answer one last quick question, because I work for the NHS. It says, I work for the NHS. Do I have to declare to my employer? I would actually say probably yes, depending on the work you're doing. It may or may not impact, but like Sharon said, just in case you're saying something on behalf of family carers and then they don't realise that you are, you know, so I've declared it full and upfront. So I think where there's a doubt, just declare it, and you're always keeping on the right side of things. I think we're going to need to move on, Sharon.
We are,
So
absolutely.
we can keep looking at these questions perhaps, and then
at the end, no problem.
Yeah, or in a Q&A or something, we can try and see if we can do a printed out version. Okay, so attending meetings. So we're going to cover off kind of things like communication and a little bit of how you kind of come across and present yourself. And in some of the chat, the questions have been asking, well, what if the local authority don't take you seriously? And what if they're not working with you? All of these things that we're going through today will hopefully help you present yourself so they do take you more seriously, and that in itself can help. But obviously if you're struggling, then again talk to your contact regional advisor in that respect. So communication. Effective communication, if you look at this, and there's lots of evidence out there that words on its own, so sending emails actually only conveys 7% of the information that you need to get across, and that's fairly minimal. So if you've got tricky situations and you find that only email will do, that's good. You already have to know that you're going to have to really think clearly about the email that you're going to send, maybe sense check it with a few people, because actually you can write something, and actually it can have lots of different words and meanings depending on how it's said. So even the example I always give is hello, could be fine, or it could be hello, or it could be hello, and you see that in your voice. So that's why telephone calls are actually better, 38%, because you can hear by a person's voice whether they're happy or sad, or they're laughing, joking, or they're being stern. So if you've got a difficult situation and you're still struggling, then better to telephone somebody than email them. And better still is body language. You can see 55%, which is why we always say face-to-face meetings are the best. Of course, we're all in a virtual world now. And so that's a challenge. But like we're doing this webinar, just seeing people, and if I'm moving my head or Sharon's nodding to something I'm saying, or I'm nodding to her, it all helps give you the vibe. So I think now we've discovered virtual meetings, I think that's probably the way forward. So think about doing as much face-to-face and virtual as you can. Next slide, if that's okay. And think about kind of how you come across in terms of your body language. So, and also what you say verbally, to be honest. There's the directly aggressive, um, which is your thumping and shouting and your angry head. And as I say, whilst I think we probably feel like that, we on a daily basis, we want to scream and shout. Actually, that's what we can't do. It can be helpful on occasion, but it can't be the standard form of behaviors. And when we talk about a lot of these behaviors, you'll need to look at your governance, your constitution, and your codes of conduct to make sure that as a forum you are demonstrating and role modeling what good behavior is. And actually, if people are becoming increasingly angry and disruptive and it's causing a problem, that you can refer them to the constitution or to your rules, guidance, codes of conduct, because it's just not helpful. Indirectly or passive aggressive is equally not that helpful. So that could be sulking, ignoring people, banging doors, being sarcastic. Again, really not helpful. As much as you might want to shout and scream and say and be as sarcastic to whoever professional across the table, or even within your own forum, sometimes it's just unhelpful. It's not a way to deal with conflict. And equally passive, so just being a victim surrendering. So if you think, do you know what, it's not worth the effort, I'm just going to go la 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 and pretend it's not happening, that's not going to help you, because what we're not doing is resolving any of these issues. What we really need to try and do is in that corner, bottom right hand, is that assertiveness, and that's about respecting yourself as well as respecting other people's views. And it's about being diplomatic, explaining something that maybe isn't helpful, but you're doing it in a calm, collected way that is controlled, and that you're working through the issues. And if something's being difficult in the forum, or that, don't ignore it, but there are ways to deal with it, but in a calm and assertive manner. Again, there are other webinars and there are leadership courses that we deal with this, etc. So if you're interested, then do look at Contact's website. So next slide, if that's okay. What's really important, I think, to when you're working with anyone, whether it's say in the forum or across your local area, is having some trusted relationships. And again, that's not saying you're being a victim and you're a yes person. A trusted relationship is about being able to be that critical friend, have constructive feedback that isn't always great, but that people trust and know that actually you're on, you're there with a straight agenda. So you have to know your information. You can't be making stuff up or exaggerating figures or saying that you're representing the whole of the borough if actually there are 3 people on your books. If there are only 3 people on your books, then you need to be working with your families to try and build up that network and somebody else's network before you can then maybe work with the local authority. You've got to deliver on what you say you're going to do. We all know honesty and being fair and objective are key, and therefore we have to role model that. So we have to do what we say we're going to do. And also understand other people's motivations, particularly ourselves as if we're volunteering. It's kind of knowing what we can do, what's in it for us, because most people don't come in it to help the world and not actually help themselves as much as it's not about our own child. But if we know, I don't know, particular parents got ADHD interest or their child has, and there's not many ADHD services in the borough, that's not to say that you can't work with them to support that. It just can't be their only issue. And look at what works, points of agreement, what's working, um, what you can share. And again, on the contact website, there's I think it was Rotherham worked with their local area, producing a Rotherham Charter of Co-Production and looking at the kind of key points of where you can actually build and develop co-production. And a lot of that is around trust, honesty, welcome, etc. Really important. So we all have to think about that and almost be the bigger person, even if we might not be getting that back. If we look at our own behaviors and how we can be to that other person, then you will start to see a shift. You'll start to see things changing. So next slide, if you can. So the key to, I think, attending a good meeting is ensuring that you have a level of confidence, and usually that's through preparation. And I'm guessing that a lot of you will be new to this, and this is why you've joined us. Or if you're not new, you may have not heard of this, before. But it's really important when you're having new volunteers is to try and have buddies that you can buddy up and talk to people with more experience so you can learn from them. Or if you're going to a meeting, actually attend with somebody. Sometimes I think our forums are always struggling to try and attract and recruit, and it's the same couple of people are doing everything. So when they do get a new person, sometimes it's like, oh, well, actually, you just go to this meeting. But actually, we need to prepare and support all of our people within the forum. So if capacity allows, attend in pairs, but even if you can't do it on a regular basis, at least for the first couple of meetings to introduce them, help them to feel comfortable. Read up, look at minutes, past papers, talk to somebody so that you're not coming in blind. Prepare in advance, and things like acronyms, jargon, all of that stuff. Ideally, in meetings, we shouldn't be using the jargon, but of course it will happen. So feel confident to ask and say, actually, I don't understand, you've just used that word. What does that mean? But equally, I'm sure within the forum and also, again, contact National Network, Enfield, Our Voice, I can say, I chair there. We've got glossary of terms, etc., that you can just download or pick up and share with other people so that you've got a set of information that everybody understands. And it's really important that you are talking to other parents, even if it's your own personal network, people at the school gate, or your coffee mornings at school, albeit virtual at the moment. If you know it's not just your view and a few other people are saying the same thing, then it starts to be a theme and you can start to look and build on that. And remember, actually, we are living our lives, and other people, other professionals are not necessarily. So feel confident that you are a subject matter expert because you're waking up every morning and going to sleep with that same hat on, the same head on. So be confident in that. If we move on, we're also looking at when attending a meeting. Again, we've said this so many times, you are representing not just your own personal experience, but that of others. That's absolutely key. And equally key is confidentiality. So whether it's a forum meeting or a local area meeting, check on what information is being discussed, whether that's okay to share with your wider membership or with the forum, if it's with the local area, or what needs to be confidential. Because again, going back to that trust, and really ensuring that the local authority will have you at the table. They need to know that you're not going to run off and say to the next, and actually then you're not going to be brought back again. They won't invite you again. So confidentiality is really important across the piece. And we use that word professional parent, and I do kind of apologise. A lot of us are professionals, Sharon, I'm sure a number of you on this webinar. In fact, I'd say most of our parents that kind of volunteer in the forum world have some kind of background. So we're all potentially professionals. But if you're a parent who's never worked in the past, don't think of yourself as, oh, well, I'm just a parent, because actually just having to live and get through the day and work with other professionals, in effect, you raise your game and you become a lot more professional. And as Sharon's mentioned, being that critical, constructive friend, it's not about being a yes person. We're not there to just agree with the local authority, but we are there to be constructive. So if there is something that's not working and 50 parents have told you that, then it's about, do you know what, this isn't working, but actually what they are recommending is something that might work quite quickly. So there was a question earlier that it just comes to mind about examples of co-production. We had social care short breaks, and lots of people were waiting ages for referrals. And when we had a conversation with the local authority, they were saying, actually, we're finding that some parents are not coming back to us, so we're going time and time again at panel to make a decision, and we're wasting our time there, and actually we're not getting to our new parents coming through. And actually it took parents to say, well, why are you going back to them like for months? And we were the ones that said, actually, as this group of parents, contact them 3 times in 3 different ways and go back to the referrer that referred them. And if they're still not interested, then you move on. And that made such a difference. It sped up the process, and far more families who really needed help and support were then getting it. So there are lots and lots of good examples of co-production. So we're here about solutioning and not just about moaning. Next slide. I think what's also important is there's some key principles about when you are attending a meeting. I'm not sure if this, is prepare. So have a one pager if you can, top tips, anything that, key messages that you want to get across, any key points from your parents' experiences. And we always say 3 to 5 messages. So think about what are the key points. If you just go on and there's loads of stuff, it just gets lost and people just don't know what to prioritize. But within a forum, if you can decide as a forum what your key points are, or as a chair, whatever, within the forum, you decide for your forum meeting, what are the key messages you need to get across, and the rest you can leave as AOB or whatever. Then that keeps you more effective and on task. And again, go back to thinking about your relationships, always important. If you want to move on, there's some key kind of principles that when you're attending a meeting, that sounds really obvious, but isn't always. And I've unfortunately been in some meetings, and I just think, some of our families are angry, and we understand that. But equally, it's about, again, using that word professional, and you'll get more respect. So if you treat other people with respect, you get the respect back generally. You're trying to put yourself in a positive manner so that you can constructively challenge. I'm not going to read all of these because I think you can see these yourself, but I think you'll keep hearing the words calm, objective, fair, even though you might be struggling and you're just thinking, God, they're just talking a load of rubbish. Try and then use that evidence to demonstrate why, in fact, and you can ask questions like, oh, I understand you've said this. Interesting enough, a number of our parents are actually saying that they're still struggling on why. Do you think, can you maybe talk through why that might be the case and why there's some kind of disconnect between, what you're saying and actually what we're finding on the ground? So you can still challenge, but it's the way you're doing it. And also think about the meetings that you're attending. So if you're just there as a tick box and you're not able to comment or have a view, then argue, why are you there? So, if your time is precious, only think about, are we attending meetings that we know we have to be because we can make a difference? And if you're not making a difference, I would challenge that. And also think about how you're presenting yourself. So even Sharon and I today were making sure, our cameras were good, our background wasn't distracting. I know I've got a cat and a young child who's doing his own thing. So, you have to think about how you are and what's going on in your mind, because that comes across. So your facial expression, and we know that's why people with autism struggle, because they're not able to read those social cues that neurotypical people pick up on. And so we need to be thinking about that ourselves. Our posture, are we sitting kind of straight and focused, deep breaths, and we kind of, again, going back to that assertive behavior, as opposed to kind of leaning in, or your face is going red because you're so angry with what they're saying. Try not to fidget, or I used to sit here and do this and twiddle my hair. It's just really irritating. You need to be aware of your own foibles, and try maybe put your hand on your lap, or hold a piece of paper and a pen and be writing, and also show that you're listening. I mean, it's interesting. Again, I've got a camera on my laptop that could be the bottom left hand corner, and so it looks like I'm looking in the space when I'm talking to people, because I'm looking at them on the picture screen, because my camera's at the bottom. So now I'm having to learn to speak into my camera at the bottom, so people can see me. So think about eye contact even in a virtual world. Take notes and reflect what they're saying. If they've said something, say, oh, so you've said that, so am I right in thinking that? And then it shows that you're listening. Really good with our own forum members. If they feel frustrated or angry and they don't feel that they're being heard, you can actually say, oh, actually, it's interesting you say that. So what you're saying is da 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 da, and then can you explain further, so they really know that you're listening to them. So moving on, if you look at these kind of images here, you've got a number of pictures, and I think we've asked this question a number of times where we've not been on a webinar, and you think about everything you're communicating. You're the ambassador, whether you're in a forum or whether you're out of your forum and representing your forum in other meetings. And we might feel like all of this at any one point in time, and equally we will have parents who are like this, and it's all valid and it's all equal. And sometimes we have to go through all of those processes. But I'm hoping that you'd think that the lady on the left-hand side, who's just kind of smiling and calm, that you would want her to be in a meeting with you as opposed to all of the others. So again, I'm thinking about local authority health meetings. It's having that open, trusted, calm, neutral face and behavior that will elicit more trust, as opposed to the person sitting there thinking, God, I'm bored, I've heard this so much and nothing ever changes and you're all just load of rubbish. It's not going to help you move things forward. Okay, moving on. I'm just conscious of our time. So there's some top tips here, just a kind of summary that I think really important. It's just a useful slide to try and focus on. So always be prepared for your meetings. Think about what you're going to say. Think about what your key messages are. I'd say have no more than 3, maximum of 5. Otherwise, it's just too much, and people's brains don't compute and won't through it. Make sure you've got evidence, and Sharon will be talking about that in the next few slides after the questions. Speak clearly, and now we've got all this virtual etiquette, isn't there? Put your hand up, show that you want to say something, and listen to what's being said, and make sure you can summarize and reflect back, because actually it's really important also to then feed back to whoever, whether it's your wider family members or the forum itself. Make sure you're making notes, and that also it's really, again, a good technique to say, so I just want to check my understanding. This is what the issues are, and this is what you're suggesting as a way forward. I just want to be clear so that I can feed that back. I'm assuming that's okay to share that information. It's not confidential. So they're kind of set phrases that you can be using. And if you disagree, rather than going, well, no, that's wrong, or I disagree, again, tactful. Actually, that's a really interesting point. But a survey that was that we just conducted, actually showing about 30 parents, were saying this. So it's interesting. There's probably a different perspective here, and what do you think that's behind that? So there's different ways of saying no, I disagree. But equally, don't be afraid to ask questions or say that you don't understand. And I think it's really important, because often, whether it's in a forum and it might be chair or somebody's talking and they're understanding all the jargon and you don't, or that you're in a health or a local authority meeting, often we have to remember that not everybody understands, and it's actually helpful for that person to know, actually, I need to rephrase this or say it in a different way to make sure that things are being clear. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of confidence and just some top tips in those meetings. I'm thinking we're on a question slide. So
Yes.
again, conscious of our time, so just a couple of minutes for questions.
Yeah, I've been answering questions in the chat that were related to the first half, and so I've been trying to answer those as we've been going. So there's two for you at the moment. So the first one is the main purpose of co-production to improve outcomes of children and young people, and how can that be summed up in a 3-word phrase? So that's your first
I
question.
don't know about the 3-word phrase, but certainly I think it's children, young people, and their families would be who is it aimed at? Because let's not forget brothers and sisters. We're all impacted. Parents, grandparents, potentially. So obviously the child and the young person is at the centre, but it's to improve the lives of all of our families. And is that 3 words? Improving families' lives. Is that 3?
Nice, yes, lovely.
Don't know what your thoughts are, Sharon.
Yeah, I've been sitting there thinking, like, is it around improving futures? So better futures, but I couldn't think of a third word. But yeah, I think that's a great, great 3-word phrase. Just one more question at the moment for you. How do people fit in if they have not got a child or young person with SEND?
That's a really interesting question, and there's been lots of conversation around this. Because technically, obviously, the idea of a parent carer forum is that you're a parent carer, and we have widened the definition. So if you look at a number of definitions and Contact and National Network, a parent carer doesn't necessarily mean a parent. It can be grandparent. Again, it could be brother or sister who's got experience of caring. So I think we have to acknowledge that it's a wider context here. But equally, lots of families might have SCN, children with SCN, so it might be mild. I think that's equally, we have to be completely diverse and open. I have noted some forums have decided to have a paid coordinator who does a lot of the doing and coordination, and they don't have SCN, or their child doesn't have SCN either. And again, this is my personal opinion. I think that's okay. I think the key thing is that whatever the forum is doing, they are ensuring that they are getting feedback and evidence from families and children and young people who do have some kind of special educational need, that at least some of their volunteers, or most of their volunteers, are parent carers in the wider definition. But does every person within the forum have to have SEN or a child with SEN? I personally think no. But I think we have to be careful that it doesn't go the other way and you end up with a parent carer forum that has, none of them have SEN, and they're being run by, governors that have no link or no parenting responsibilities, and then that's going the wrong way. I don't know what your thoughts are, Sharon.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's about balance, and I recall when I was the chair of the forum, we had it written into our constitution that we could co-opt, I think it was up to 3 people on the steering committee who might be able to bring expertise and knowledge, for instance finance knowledge, that
Yeah.
were not
Or
necessarily
legal.
legal knowledge, absolutely.
Yeah.
Or it could
Yeah.
be just somebody who's got really great contacts and relationships with local voluntary sector organisations, or who has expertise around governance, or whatever it is. But it's about the balance, isn't it? So I think that we said we could co-opt 3 people onto the committee, but we always said that we would want 9 parent carers, so it's about making sure that the emphasis on that parent voice.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
very conscious of timing.
Time. Yes. Let's.
We've got 15 minutes left. So just to let you all know, I've just had a quick chat with Helen from Contact. We may run over on this webinar 5 or 10 minutes later, if that's okay with Fazilla, if she's able to stay on. We will try and answer as many questions as we can as we go, or in the chat. But the whole session is being recorded, so if you do need to leave at 12 o'clock, then we do understand, and we apologise that we have tried to cram too much information into the hour and a half, but we wanted to make it really positive for you all in terms of the content. So we will just keep going until we finish, and we'll answer as many questions as we can. So, the final section that I'm going to be talking about is gathering and presenting evidence and feedback. So throughout all of this, we have been talking about the importance of representing that wider parent voice and the complexity of that voice, and also the importance of feedback. So going back to parents and to talk about what has happened as a result of them engaging with the forum. So that's what I'm going to cover in this part of the presentation. So parent carer forums, part of your role we've already talked about, is to gather the views of local parents and carers of children and young people with special educational needs and disabilities. And that's to highlight where local services and processes and commissioning are working well as providing some of that constructive challenge that we've talked about when there need to be some changes or some improvements that families are reporting that things are just not working as well as they could be. So forums use the information that they gather to influence at strategic meetings, but also to respond to consultations, whether that's local consultations or national ones that are taking place, and through other co-production opportunities. And it's really important actually to gather that evidence because it helps you become more effective as a forum as well. So by recording the issues that parents are raising with you and their experiences, it helps not only provide evidence for when you're engaging with professionals in meetings or responding to consultations, but it also allows you as a forum to be transparent and open to parents in your local area about what views you're representing. So as somebody now who's not on my parent carer forum committee, it's really important to me as a parent member to understand when I'm filling in the survey, what voices, what experiences, how are you representing that when you go to those meetings or when you fill in the consultation documents. So gathering that evidence and then providing that feedback allows that transparency. It allows your parent membership base to know exactly what you're representing and how you're representing those voices. In addition to that, it will help you as a forum to reflect on what you've heard and to think about priorities for your organisation, to understand if we have got limited resource and we can only attend, say, 5 meetings this week or this month, which 5 are the most important for parents. So it's about making sure that the decisions you're making about developing your forum, about developing participation, is actually based also on that evidence as well. Your evidence, your bank of evidence, can be really useful to also highlight trends and to identify new issues arising. So over a period of time, you'll be able to see changes in what parents are talking to you about. You'll be able to see, well, suddenly this has become a big issue for parents locally, and it allows you to do some proactive work as well. So what you're wanting to do is draw together lots of individual stories that will help present the reality of parents' experiences, but which will also help the parent care forum grow and be more effective. So by backing up these stories and the experiences with even more evidence, it makes it more powerful when you're actually presenting. So there is a whole range of places or different ways that you can go and gather evidence. And I think this was one of the questions in the Q&A section earlier about where do you go to get this information? And this is not by any means an exhaustive list, But obviously, some of the obvious things you can do is surveys, so online surveys using things such as SurveyMonkey or Google Forms, or paper copies of surveys when you get back to real life engagement and actually seeing people face to face. You could do a very quick survey every time you have a coffee morning or an engagement with families. You could just say, here's 3 questions for you to fill in, and it could be on whatever theme it is for that month that you want to find out about. It's important when you're gathering information that you're not just gathering stories of things that are going wrong, but actually asking your wide parent base about those things. So if, for instance, lots of parents are reporting issues around short breaks, you need to understand, is this a wider problem? Are parents across the whole area finding this, or is it a particular group of parents are struggling, and what are the reasons for that? Focus groups and parent meetings, and you could have flip charts put up, you could have post-it notes, you could have a feedback box, and there's lots of various creative ways. I know one forum that has a washing line, and they have sort of cut out clothes, and people can go and hang up their dirty washing and basically say things that are troubling them before they go into meetings, and then that can all be collated. So there's lots of ways you can do that. Social media, obviously using things such as Facebook groups, Twitter, or your own website. You could have WhatsApp groups, etc. Just bear in mind some of the sort of confidentiality issues there. Previous feedback, obviously, we've talked about maybe creating something like an issues log when parents are raising issues with you or telling you about things they're looking for support from. You might be signposting those parents, but log what they're telling you about. And then you can count up how many people, and this is where you can start to spot some of those trends. And working with other support groups or organisations such as Healthwatch or your Send Us organisation, they might also say that actually there's a lot of people have been contacting them about particular things in that period of time. Local authority. The local authority will have also a huge wealth of data, and although sometimes it can be questionable about how useful or meaningful or how well they use it, it's also worth having a look at. So, for instance, there should be a joint strategic needs assessment, so JSNA should be available. Their short break statement should have information in there, current consultations, but also their website as well. You might ask the local authority or health if you can conduct or undertake a sort of joint research project. Your forum might be able to be commissioned to actually undertake some of that work. The school playground, obviously, social media groups that you might be in, your interactions with your friends and family, all of that is really important information as well. You could put on a specific event, such as a themed coffee morning, or you could think about doing something such as a family fun day. Obviously, if you're doing something such as a fun day, you need to build in participation elements. So whether it's a survey, whether it is a focus group at the beginning of the fun day, or whether it's that there's an activity for the children and then you go and talk to all of the parents and get their feedback on a particular issue. So there does need to be a participation element to that, especially if you're using the DFE funding for that. Reports from conferences and events, the internet, there's so much information out there. Also, other organisations, contact the national network, other forums might be doing some work that you can piggyback on and get some of the information that they have got. Other charities, people like MenCat, the Down Syndrome Association, they frequently put out reports and information that can back up what you're saying is happening locally. And then there are a number of resources such as the Office of National Statistics, the Department for Education, so the DFE puts out statistics about special educational needs as well. So there are lots of places that you can go and find that information. And what you need to do is make sure that when you're gathering that information, that there is diversity in it, and that it's not all just the same parents or the same type of parents that you're gathering your evidence from. So you need to think about what is your local community like and how can you represent that whole diversity that is in your community. So that's including all socioeconomic groups, for instance, all ages from 0 to 25, rather than just focusing, for instance, on school age 4 to 16. So thinking about the early years and the post 16, particularly the sort of maybe 19 to 25 age group as well. A breadth of conditions, disabilities, diagnosis, including rare disorders as well. It may well be that if you are linking up with a range of support groups, such as autism support groups, Down syndrome support groups, parents who have children who have rare conditions might not be represented in those organisations. Genders, sexualities, different types and stages of education, so mainstream as well as specialist provision. Mainstream can be particularly difficult to engage with, so you might need to think about how you actually reach those parents, especially those who have children at SEN support and might not have education, health and care plans. They might not even necessarily know that their child is on the SEN register, although the school should have told them that. But how can you find ways to engage with those families who really sometimes can struggle more than the families who've got education, health and care plans in place and their child's at a specialist setting? And underrepresented and seldom heard groups. So that can be ethnic minority groups, traveller families, armed forces, adoptive or foster parents, single parents, refugee families, asylum seekers, homeless families. Sometimes it can be dads, working parents, and I've also already mentioned rare conditions. Now, it's really important that as part of this work that you are familiar with your forum's confidentiality and data processing policy, because confidentiality is a really important principle so that people understand when they're sharing information with you, what you're going to do with that information, how you're going to use it. And forums need to comply with GDPR legislation. Contact has a webinar about GDPR. It's worth going and watching it if you haven't already, because it's a really useful webinar to ensure that you're informed about GDPR. So any information that is shared with your forum around membership forms or surveys, or even if you're just taking photos at events, you need to think about getting explicit permission from those families for that to be used. And information can only be used in the way that families have actually given that express permission for you to do. The only time really that you can break that duty for confidentiality is if there's a safeguarding issue. So if there is a risk of harm to a child or a vulnerable adult, then safeguarding duties will always be more important than any confidentiality concerns. So as well as looking into your forum's confidentiality and data processing policies, you should also be familiar with your safeguarding policy as well. And if your forum doesn't have one, you should encourage them to have a safeguarding policy and a safeguarding lead. And there is a range of safeguarding training available. And again, Contact has a safeguarding webinar available, and the NSPCC offers safeguarding training too. So presenting information, it's really important to know where you can find the information that you need, and to put some checks in place to ensure that it's accurate, and to gather additional evidence if you need to. So if things don't quite add up, or if you think it's a particularly complex picture, go and gather more evidence. So you're looking to use your individual circumstances, so things that families are telling you, but to create this bigger picture and this bigger body of what's happening locally. And you want to, if you're going to draw on individual stories, maybe to present a case study, you need to make sure that that's backed up with additional evidence so that you don't fall into this anecdotal trap where the local authority potentially could say, well, that's just one family. And you need to be able to say, this is an example of what happens when a family faces difficulties such as this, but what we've been told is that 200 families, for instance, are facing these difficulties. So when you're presenting your information, you need to think about plan disability and the whole age range, as we've already talked about. So think about who's your audience, what do they already know, what are their interests, and what is their role, why are they there, why are you presenting to them? And keep your presentation simple, highlight the key points, verbally rehearse what you want to say with somebody else or in front of the mirror. If you're taking along written information, if you can, keep it to 1 page, because people are really busy and don't want to read huge reports. If it has to be longer than 1 page, have a short summary page at the front so that they can quickly read the summary if they're not able to read the whole detail. Visually, be creative. People are more likely to read things if it looks attractive. So consider the use of photos with permission, and infographics as well. And when you're highlighting issues in the presentation, or whether it's written or verbally, also look at solutions and options as well as highlighting those issues. Try not to present inaccurate information or exaggerate numbers because you're trying to get something to change. And don't, when you're going out and gathering information, and then when you're also presented it, try not to focus on leading or biased questions or information. Fazilla's already talked about not being overly emotive, and obviously when you're presenting on behalf of your forum, you shouldn't be using that situation to lobby for something on your own behalf or for your own family. So these are just some example infographics. I've taken these from the National Network of Parent Carer Forums annual report. They're just examples of how to represent quite a lot of information using visuals, which means that people can very quickly see the snapshot there and get a picture. So visuals can be used to actually give a message about what's happening with that data and what's happening with that. You can see, for instance, on the right-hand side, it talks about the growth in National Network membership. So you could have that there's a growth in parents reporting issues about X, Y, and Z, or children are out of school, or that delays in EHCP timescales, or whatever it is, but visually you can represent that. And people are 30 times more likely to read something that has images on than just text alone. And there are a number of websites and apps that you can use to create these infographics. You don't need to be a graphic designer. So it could be things such as Canva or Pictochart, but otherwise, if you go and Google infographics, then you will be able to find a range of different websites. So just coming up to my last 2 slides. It's really important to share feedback. We have been talking about within the steering group, we want to make sure that everybody who's involved in running the forum has got the same information, and that can help inform your future strategic engagement, which I've already talked about. It also helps you to check the legality of proposals as well. So when parents are feeding back to you and telling you about what's happening on the ground, and you can also use that evidence to actually challenge some local policy too. With your members, so you want to encourage your members to get involved with you more and to have further input and further engagement. And the way of doing that is actually showing how you've used their information, how when they've told you things that have been a problem, you've gone and represented that voice and things have happened and there has been change. And that's really powerful, and that's how you'll get more parents involved. But also accountability, which we've talked about. So making sure that you, because you are as an organisation accountable to parents in your local area, you want to make sure that you are able to go out and actually say, you've told us this and this is what we did with your information. And then with other stakeholders, obviously, that's how we affect change. And the last one, I just want to, actually I've got 2 more, the ABCD of feedback. So providing feedback is a really important part of being that rep. We've talked about the need to close that feedback loop. But how do we do that effectively? Well, we have an ABCD. So information needs to be accurate. When you come out of a meeting and you're reporting about what's happened, or when you're going back to parents to tell them about things, you should be specific. You should, again, provide evidence of what you're saying. Don't use sweeping statements and emotional language. So states and facts rather than just opinion. It should be balanced. You don't want to just pass on negative comments about your attendance. Say things that have gone well as well. So what was the impact of your representation? You went along to that meeting. What role did you play in that meeting? And I know there were a couple of questions in the chat before about this in terms of not being able to contribute necessarily effectively in those meetings because there's no space on the agenda. So taking that back to your steering group and saying, how can we approach the local authority to work in co-production to develop that agenda so that it includes more parent voice. Constructive, you're not there just to identify problems, but also to help find a solution. So if you're raising an issue, try and present an idea, a solution. What could the next steps be? And how does this relate to the other work that the forum are doing and the issues that the families are facing? And then the last one is to be depersonalised. So if you think that something has gone wrong or somebody has done something wrong, try to talk about the impact of the meeting or the outcomes from the meeting rather than what individuals have done. So talk about, for instance, I struggled to get my voice across rather than this person was blocking me every time I tried to talk. And then use that as a way then of engaging back with those meeting organisers and saying, we had problems in that meeting, and we talk about how we can improve that going forward. So after you've attended a meeting or a project group, as a rep, you need to collate your feedback, including the outcomes from the meeting, any action points, any deadlines that maybe have been agreed to. Deliver it to your forum committee or your administrator, whoever is coordinating that. Try to include information, if you know it, about the next time and date of the next meeting. Was there anything that could be done to have improved your experience as parent rep? How was your contribution? Is there anything that can be put in place to support you? Do you need any further information next time or training to support you in that engagement? And then finally, what impact did your involvement have? And just finally, to close this webinar, really, we'll have questions. It's just to say, your family has to come first, so don't overcommit. And make sure that you also have time for your own family as well. Look after yourself. Think about your own resilience. Think about your own mental well-being and your own health, whether that's physical health or mental health. So there are just some suggestions here of how to do that. So make time for self-reflection. Maybe keep a notebook or do some journaling so that you can actually reflect. It can be quite difficult hearing lots of stories about things that are going wrong for families locally. So it can be hard and you might take that on yourself. But find ways of actually being able to talk that through with others in your forum if you find you're struggling with that. Don't overcommit and be wary of burnout. Take time out if you need it as well. Safeguarding, we just want to put this in as obviously you need to make sure you don't put yourself at risk in any situation. So if you're meeting with parents face to face, let other people know where you're going, always meet in public spaces, etc. Be neutral, keep your opinions to yourself. Don't go to a meeting and then go straight onto your own personal social media and basically start having to go about what's gone on or different people in the local authority, etc. And be really mindful of the fact that if you're in that parent rep role, you're there representing the organisation. And we've talked about being wary of taking on people's troubles and woes. Find out what your forum's policies are about supporting parent reps and wellbeing. Forums are allowed to spend money on that. So if it's not something that your forum is doing and you feel it's important, then it's something to raise with them. And then we've just got a couple of links to some videos for you to watch in your own time. So this is on the PowerPoint, so I'm going to skip straight to questions, but they are worth having a watch if you have a few extra minutes. So open the floor to questions.
So we've had a couple of questions. One was asking about local authority information and do they not collate their own information?
Yeah, absolutely. So the local authority will have information that they'll be collating. And obviously in the spirit of co-production, it's worth asking them what information they have, what they can share with you. And you've always got the right to do freedom of information requests, but firstly, they can take quite a lot of time for you to actually get the results back from those. But also, if co-production is going well in your local area, then you should just be able to have that relationship with the local authority where you ask and where they'll share that information with you. So yeah, if there's something that you want to know, then ask them for it, absolutely.
And also, it may be that they do have information, but often they may not get people responding back to them, whereas a forum, you might get more response because people know you're genuine and you're really interested in what you've got to say. Just quickly, because I'm just conscious, maybe two other questions. One question was around, when you're attending meetings all the time and you're back to back and you might be full time actually doing that, then how do you equally square off having time within the forum and time for yourself? So that's a challenging one.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's where it comes down to the forum committee or members or the reps for you all to get together and to think about what's most important for the organisation and also for the well-being of your parent reps. It might be that for a few meetings you actually send in a written response rather than send in a parent representative. You don't have to go to everything. So it could be that for some things that you don't actually go to it and you just send in a report or some feedback. And it's about then making sure that your forum has got time to firstly go out and gather evidence, but also to build your membership base and to train up new parent reps as well. So obviously the more parent representatives you have, the more opportunities you have to actually engage in those meetings. But there will be times in your forum where you actually have to say, we can't send people to all of those meetings. The priority for us at the moment is this,
Exactly.
this, and this. And
Yeah.
what's really important is that we're going out and we're recruiting and we're training more parent reps. And again, all of the things that we've talked about in this presentation around feeding back to parents, showing them the difference that it makes, will encourage more people to get involved. And then you'll be able to train them and support them and put them in place of buddies and all of those sorts of things. So.
Many hands make light work. I'm conscious of our time now. There is lots of information on the contact website, on the National Parent Care Forum website, lots of webinars, details, case studies of co-production. There are newsletters that go out from Contact and the national network around, how parent care forums have been working co-productively with their local authorities. So there's lots of good stuff out there. Just have a look of those 3 websites and you'll get lots of information. I think we probably need to round up now.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
do you want to?
Oh, didn't need to do that. I went too far. Yes, so we'd like to say thank you for attending today and bearing with us as we went 10 minutes over. There will be a short questionnaire that will launch at the end of this webinar, and it would be great if you could spend the time to actually complete that. Because that will help us plan future online sessions as well. So let us know if there's other topics you want to see. I know that somebody did put in the questions that they were interested potentially in Contact looking at putting on a session about paid staff and volunteers and the different roles and how that can work. So I will take that back to Sarah and Sue and let them know. The recording of this webinar will be online together with the PDF of the presentation and the questions. So that'll all be on Contact's website for you to see. So you'll be able to access that in the future and share it with other people in your forum as well. So I would just like to say thank you to you all for your questions. And yes, we're at the end of this presentation. Thank you.
Thanks everyone for listening, and hopefully you found it useful, and best of luck and have a lovely Easter. Have some time out, guys, with your families. Take care,
Enjoy.
everyone. Bye.
Bye.